Morning, everyone.
Morning. Good morning.
Bright and early. Looks like we got a great day. So, my name is Aaron Manire, and this is going to be a lifecycle approach to configuration workflows. I'll just get right into it. So, I am a Drupal developer, have been a Drupal developer since about 2007. When I first started dabbling with Drupal 4.7.1, I think it was. And been building Drupal sites ever since then. I got a job at a small company in the Boston area after kind of being a hobbyist for a little while, and built sites for very, very small nonprofits, and some of them started to got bigger projects over time. Back in the day, didn't use version control at all. Didn't even have a local copy of the site to start. We were just working on the terminal directly on a dev server. But over time, we started to incorporate different kinds of practices, first Subversion and then switching over to Git, and got bigger and bigger projects. And then in 2011, I was hired at Isovera, based in Waltham, and been working on much bigger projects since then, and have seen a lot of changes with Drupal, and different changes in workflows and things. So I'm going to give you a little bit of that background to kind of frame where I'm coming from in some of the concepts that I get into in the session. So I'm going to pitch this as more of kind of like feeling out some ideas and thinking about the state of things. I'm not trying to give any hard and fast recommendations, but like explore these topics, and I hope to have a good discussion about them. So. Before I go any further, let me ask people here: how many of you are currently using the Drupal features module with version control right now? So Drupal 7 sites, right? About 50-50. Cool. Anybody not using features at all with or configuration management with version control? Just Git. Okay, so everybody's pretty much using it. All right. And how about in Drupal 8, configuration management in version control? Okay, good portion. How many have used the config split module here? Okay, great. So that's sort of a relatively new innovation in Drupal. I think it's coming around. And it kind of helps things move along in Drupal 8. So that helps me get a sense of where we're at with I think I'm going to be more kind of high-level, kind of business-oriented in the session. So some of these concepts, it's great that you'll have that under your belt to understand. Okay, so I was going to do a big section here on the history of configuration management and how we got here from features. Sounds like a lot of you already know some of this stuff, but also right after this session in the same room, Zach Weishar, a colleague of mine at Isovera, is going to be giving a great session with tips and tricks on using configuration management. I highly recommend his session. It's going to be a lot more technical. Check that out. He'll give you the history. But the one thing I do want to say that I think, there's Zach right there. And the one thing I do want to say about configuration management now, like that I think is really important to reinforce. It's great for collaborative workflows and everything. I think the number one reason to have this in place is that it allows us to roll back to a previous configuration state on a site without destroying data, right? Like that ability to have kind of an undo is a really critical key feature of configuration management. I think it's worth keeping that in mind as we talk it through. So I gave you a little bit of my background when I came to Isavera, and I want to kind of rewind history and talk a little bit about Drupal's value proposition back then. So, you know, a lot of, I think, less of a concern now, but back then you still had to sell open source to prospective clients and say, you know, you should look at this over proprietary sites, proprietary services, or CMSs. And one of the big advantages of open source projects is that they're free, right? You can just go download the code; it's there. Well, okay, we know it's not really free in practice. You still have to pay a developer or a site builder to actually build it out. But the software is actually free, and that's Drupal has a great developer community. One of the best I've worked with, and as we can see here today. It's a robust and flexible content management system and framework. You all know about this. It's got really robust user permissions with roles, hook system in 2011. Secure, it's reliable, very scalable, performant CMS, and has a user interface that allows you to build, client-facing, site visitor-facing features. There's kind of a low barrier to actually get people in there configuring content types and working as an administrator. A lot of people came into Drupal as site builders and became developers over time. I'm one of them, right? And that was a big factor. And that it is open source and that it's portable. You're not stuck with that original company that built the site or it's hosting it. You could, if you need to find a different developer, or you need to take that project, you can move it somewhere else, rehost it. So, in 2017, with Drupal 8, still free. Okay, it's not really free, but still is open source. Same active developer community, that hasn't changed. Even more robust and flexible. Not hooked, I probably should have changed to more object-oriented, but I think this is where Drupal 8 has really advanced. It's very scalable, even more performant with some of the new caching features and so on. And it still has a UI, just like it did back in 2011. I don't know if you can kind of see that, but it's kind of a frowny face that, like, yeah, it's got a UI, but it's sort of complicated depending on what your workflow is, how that actually is used in practice. It's still open source and still portable. You can take a site from a development shop and then rehost it on, say, Pantheon or platform.sh. You can move things around. But it's a bit more complicated now with the build process and CI systems and what version controls host repository you're hosting with. So it's still portable. It's going to cost you a little bit, though, to move it. And let's compare that in the competitive landscape of other software right now. And these are often cited as Drupal's biggest competitors. Trees talks about this a lot. WordPress still more for the smaller projects. And WordPress definitely has like the user interface and the content authoring experience going for it. And then there's like these bigger enterprise CMSs that are putting pressure on as competitors in Drupal. There's services, again, more in the low end, not as big scale projects, but if you've looked at Wix recently, we lost a client project to Wix. They have pretty good paragraphs equivalent in Wix, drag and drop UIs, they're pretty powerful, and they have some built-in features that I think are worth looking at. And then there's this new school JavaScript EE stuff, a mean stack and jam stack, if you've heard of those. I think more developer-oriented, kind of pulling away potential Drupal developers, but still worth keeping in mind as the current landscape. So what does that mean for Drupal? It's like we're seeing increased demand for a friendlier content authoring experience. And Dries has been talking about this with Media Initiative and like getting better media library and handling in core. That's like a major focus right now. I think it also speaks to the success of the paragraphs module in kind of late Drupal 7 projects and Drupal 8. We're seeing a lot better performance with or expectations for performance, fast site loads. An expectation of uptime and reliability on the site. Security, of course. And things like on an enterprise level project that you have the ability to see records of changes on the site. Especially like e-commerce projects. This could be really critical to provide that capability. So let's think about like different kinds of Drupal projects that could be built. Dries likes to talk about Drupal being more for ambitious sites and using that as kind of a category. I think there are still Drupal sites out there. I have one, I bet some of you do, that I just have a single responsible developer maintaining the Drupal site. Maybe it doesn't get too much traffic, but it does get some. Then there's projects that maybe have a couple of site builders, maybe a themer. Traffic is like 100 hits a day or something, or 1,000 maybe. Even bigger projects where you really need a solution architect, you have multiple site builders collaborating, themers, maybe even have a DevOps team. And then you have like really large scale projects. You have a formal operations deployment process with high traffic and high availability demands, right? The sort of enterprise, right? We hear about a lot. So the best practices that I think have been established and that we talk about from enterprise workflows have like pretty much taken over a lot of hosting platforms and are expected now. Where you have this, I think everybody is like used to this workflow. It's kind of taken for granted now. You would work locally, deploy code to a development server. You have some integration. You would deploy that to a staging site or a testing environment, and then out to your production live site. And then you have a kind of reverse workflow of your content and coming from maybe users, coming from your production site, and then back down to your staging site and maybe a local development and dev environments. And another kind of thing we take for granted with enterprise best practices is automated testing, unit testing, behavior testing, all kinds of tests. And these are great. You want to do code review, you want to QA your site in your dev environment, test integration, make sure everything's working together when you have different developers pushing up. And then on your staging or test site, you have user acceptance testing, that the client's seeing something before it actually goes live on the production site, and they sign off, and they know what they're getting. These are all good. These are all best practices. Okay, like a little bit of flashback. Coming into this world, we had some projects in Isavera, and has anybody here, have any of you seen this DCycle I think it was DCycleProject.org is the URL, the DCycle Manifesto. Okay, so I'll give the quick summary. The site no longer looks like this. It wasn't responsive. I think this was from 2013. But we built some projects using this approach. And so the DCycle Manifesto, I'll just read it. It defines standards for achieving a dev stage production workflow for Drupal development through proper deployment, test coverage, and continuous integration. So all configuration should be in code. In Drupal 7, this can be achieved using features, strong arm, and context. And essentially what we did with this was build a couple of projects at Isovera that a developer could clone the repository and run the installation without ever getting the production, or without ever getting a database. It had everything you needed right in the repository to get you up and running with the features and install hooks. And this is a really kind of, like, back in the day, this was kind of a revelation for me to like get a lot of these workflows in place. I thought it was a little bit more popular, but anyway. So another best practice that we see in like the Acquia Insight dashboard is when you have a site that's on your production environment that you actually want to disable the user interface modules, views UI, field UI, and so on, so that you're not enabling like any kind of changes on the production site, that it's going through this workflow, dev stage prod. And there's actually a module called configuration read-only mode. Has anybody seen this module or used it? A couple, three, okay. This is like the kind of ultimate to like enforce that workflow. Once you install this on a Drupal 8 site, it's not possible to make those configuration changes on the production site. So the thing about all this is that these enterprise best practices, they're not cheap on sites. They enforce this workflow, and they can very little. It requires more time training and onboarding developers and staff and just even educating clients to how it works. And different companies have different workflows, even then different platforms or different expectations. Even the names like staging or production on like Pantheon, those are test environments and live environments. It's just names, but still there's also assumptions built into those platforms. Or platform.sh, that's another one. And then what happens when you do want to move your project from one platform to another, or from one agency to another, and there's no handoff. There's like this period where the project's just not being maintained. You end up accruing technical debt. You end up probably having overrides on production. You can end up with outdated tests. You have to maintain those tests once you build your automated tests and make sure, like when you have new features, that the tests reflect those new features. And then you can end up with a lot of extra work where things like there's not always this clear distinction between what's content and configuration. I think like taxonomy terms are a good example of that, where you can have things like views that are built into configuration that depend on a specific taxonomy term to exist. And when you deploy them, you have to like have this assurance that the taxonomy term is in place, that the term IDs match up from one environment to another. And that can take a lot of extra work to make sure that you get those right in this workflow. And so the other thing is that like QA and code review, these processes take time, and they require people to be available. You have to make sure that you have somebody who's able to review the pull requests or feature your branches and get those merged in, and you can end up with bottlenecks that maybe like the actual amount of work time isn't too much, but it still delays the deployments into the production site. So I think some of this stems from like Drupal's kind of history and its focus, and that there's sort of competing visions happening, and like interests at stake, and like what Drupal is. Okay, so I remember in I think it was DrupalCon Denver 2012. There was this core. I think it was a core session. Was the one where they were talking about the arrays of doom. That term was introduced, and I remember. I hope I'm remembering this accurately, but I remember Larry Garfield. Like there was this kind of like big debate, and it was very heated, and they were talking about the arrays of doom, and then Larry Garfield gets up and he's like, "Okay, let's take a vote. Do we think that we should be building for site builders in the user interface, or should we be building this for people working in code and developers, and themers?" And I just remember a web chick just being like, "No, we're not taking a vote. Forget that idea." But I like that tension kind of stuck with me, and I'm like, well, what is it? And there's a pretty good session you can see online. I think Atwood. It's in a link. I can get his name, but you can Google it. Does Drupal have an identity problem? It's a really interesting session, and he talks about some of these conflicts about like what are we catering to? What is Drupal trying to do, and some of the problems that are associated with Drupal not really being a kind of out of the box product. So I'm talking about like these issues where you're working within the user interface on a site, making these changes, and like the ability to deploy in this workflow. But one of the things that I think is interesting, if you have a site in a production environment using configuration management with version control, like that, as I said, like at the beginning, that one of the key points about using config management is that it gives you this ability to roll back. That undo button is really key. And even if you're not using any of those workflow deployments, I still think like as using a Drupal site, you still want to have configuration management. You still want to have it in version control. I'm not saying you should get away from that at all. And even on small projects, because that lets you have that kind of undo button. If you make some change, you can still restore to an earlier version. And that's really critical. And I didn't actually know this until I was doing a little research on this this past week, actually, that the Backdrop CMS has its own implementation of the configuration management system in Drupal 8. If you don't know what Backdrop is, it's like the fork of Drupal 7, but it actually does incorporate some of these features from Drupal 8 and configuration management with YAML files as an example of that. Or I think they're actually JSON files, but very similar to Drupal 8. So what I'm saying is we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? We do want to be able to make changes when we need to quickly, but at the same time we want to have these great practices, workflows that we've kind of seen trickle down from enterprise projects. So I mentioned the DCycle Manifesto. I humbly introduced what I call the Tricycle Manifesto. Okay, so and I think that there's a case to think about different workflows for different phases of a project, and these I think are the three phases that I'm identifying here. Is that there's a prototyping phase of a project, a build phase of a project, and maintenance phase of a project, okay? And that we think about it in terms of these phases instead of this kind of overarching best practice that we follow. So the prototyping phase, the key is that you want to rapidly iterate and just, get into the UI and add fields and bundles and things as quickly as you can. And you want to try to build out a minimum viable product or MVP or a proof of concept of what the content model of a site is. I saw a blog post on another one phrasing for this, the riskiest assumption test. Like, try to figure out what is the most difficult part of a site as soon as possible. But the point is to rapidly kind of get something in place to show your client and work with do user testing. And so you want to still use Git, version control, commit for dependencies, and then but treat configuration management not as much of an integration and deployment tool, but as just kind of a backup, a snapshot to roll back in case you need to. And your database snapshots are going to become critical in this. It's kind of feels like a little bit of a regression, but having a database snapshot while you're in this phase can be really helpful. That you just can restore to that previous instance of the site. It's I made a module and a JavaScript years ago. I used with Drupal 7 projects to do this, and it's a really simple thing. Basically, it would just do a database dump, but it would append the date, the time, the Git branch, and specifically the 7-character hash of the Git commit that was most recently used on the database. So I could always restore to that safe known fallback, right? It's a small thing. I don't want to throw that baby out with the bathwater. I think it's still useful for this phase. I don't want to deal with getting things exported into config. I just want to do quick, maybe a couple hours of work. All right, and then switching gears to the build phase, right? Now this is what we're familiar with, we talked about earlier with the enterprise workflows. So get your configuration into version control and push it up to your repository and out to other developers so that they can integrate. You might need to do database updates or the default content module, or there's a few options now with Drupal 8 for how you get non-configuration, kind of hard things that don't quite fit in there. Like I was talking about content dependencies. There's other ways to do that that aren't supported fully by the config management system. But I think the key thing to understand about this phase is that you have sprints. You have repeating routine deployments here across those environments. Right? That's a key kind of aspect of this phase, this process, that it's in active development. You have sprints and you're releasing. Now the maintenance phase is sort of after the launch, the party, and the projects wind down. Maybe you have already done a few follow-up sprints, but the site's up and running and the client's happy with it and everybody's moved on, right? But maybe you still want to have security updates out there. Okay, that's not really configuration, but maybe small feature change to a landing page or something. There, you don't have the routine sprints. You just have this kind of one-off deployment. Then you may have things like web forms that could be captured in configuration management, but maybe you're better off just not capturing them in version control at all. And there's a module called config-ignore that kind of goes along with the config split that lets you kind of say, okay, kind of detach this from config management and version control. Treat it more as content. That may be a way to manage that kind of stuff, but I mean, like I said earlier, you lose that ability to roll that back and capture those changes as versions. And there's also, in Drupal 7, there's the feature tools module that had a feature like the functionality to do this as well, and it would like kind of split out something from features. And then, so actually, how many people have done this? Like, you can just make the changes right on the production site. Like, right in, like, I want to rename this content type. Let's just go into the production UI, like, edit content, field, like, just rename it. And then you need to get it back into version control. I see some heads nodding, right? And then, okay, so there's also this, I think this is in config, in config split. It's now called conditional split. It's formerly called gray listing. It lets you kind of manage two different files to do that. I won't talk about that too much, but that's another option here. And like I said earlier, the thing about config ignore is that you're taking stuff out of version control, and so you're kind of sacrificing that capability. So when I was first thinking through these ideas, I did this diagram. It's a little hard to read. Sorry about that. But you can see that it's got the 3 phases of prototype, build, and maintain. So like thinking about working in the user interface and then switching to working in code and through config management, and then back potentially to the user interface on a production site to just get changes quickly, like small changes, smartly changed up on the production site, depending on the scale of the project and what the requirements are, the traffic and security expectations, the size of the team, and maybe the amount of content that's on the site. And another thing that kind of associated, I won't talk about this too much, but we at Isovera, we'd actually change our Git branching strategy depending on that phase as well, where we would go from just using a master branch and the default master branch, and then branching off that, merging back to it in early and maintenance phases, and then but in the build phase we would actually use the Git flow strategy with having master branch and then a parallel develop branch. So, like, you can look up the Git flow workflow if you're interested in that, but I found that it works really well with that build phase. Come back to this question. So is it okay? Can we change configuration directly on the production site? Remember that config read-only module, config read-only mode module is like, I think this kind of exemplifies that approach. So I think there are cases for that, right? Like an internal product team where you're like not working with clients, you're not an agency. You know the team, you're responsible for the site for it's your own internal project, or for projects that have very high availability demands or security demands, then that works. That makes sense. I hope it's not controversial here to say that this is very memorable, but this totally failed. Like, we've lost the drug war. And this kind of draconian approach to policy, maybe not so good in practice. So I would say there's this policy called harm reduction. Think about it in terms of harm reduction. In practice, we're not following these best practices a lot. And I think it's not a question of like what's right or what's wrong. It's a matter of tailoring your approach to the requirements of the business needs and the site visitors' needs on the project, and not just kind of mindlessly following what we consider like the right way to do it. But I am not advocating like a return to like the cowboy coding of just like going in and messing around with the production site, or it doesn't, like keep the cowboys away. But instead, like, okay, none of these actually exist yet, so I got to frame it this way. But I'm thinking about like how do we kind of mitigate the risks of making some of these changes and like dealing with them. So one idea, and I think this would be fairly trivial to do actually, is if there's some kind of production override on the site, have a ping in Slack channel. Say, hey, clients made a change on the site. We need to get that back in. Like, that seems like a no-brainer to me. Or even an email notification, all kinds. Another thing that seems a little crazy to me about this workflow is that one of the big problems is that if there's change on production and there's overridden, you will lose those changes when you do the next release. That shouldn't be so easy. That shouldn't be the default approach. I know in Zach's session he talks about there's a partial flag, I think, when doing a config import to say don't delete anything, don't do any destructive changes. I kind of think that should be the default. Like it shouldn't let you so easily blow away what could be the canonical configuration of the site. So I think that there should be some work done about like making it the default mode to be like non-destructive, and then say like, okay, yes, I do mean to like destroy this. And I think this is a process that like we do a lot. Is that like, okay, I had to go make a change on production. I had to go add a recent project of like adding entity queues directly on the production site would have really come in handy. And then I can export that and then commit it on a dedicated branch and then get that merged in to the actual code base. My dream, though, would be you could make a change on an environment, a production site potentially, and it would automatically create a pull request on the repository and say like, these are the new changes from the site, just review them and merge them in, and you have that kind of built-in workflow. But see, that's where it gets kind of like consolidating Drupal, not just like with Composer and Symfony, but also like the Git repository, like the remote repository, and it becomes like this big system. And that's where I think, like some of these competing services have a little bit of a leg up on Drupal to do this kind of thing. But I think it would be a really nice feature. Like you would you could go in and make a bunch of changes. Obviously, an advanced site builder or administrator would be able to do this. Make a configuration change, and then maybe when they feel like it's completed, click a button and say create pull request, and maybe give a description of what those commits are. And even I think there's some promising work with workspaces stuff in the latest initiatives to kind of manage these kinds of changes and potential for conflicts and things. To kind of sum that back up, Drupal's still like super powerful CMS and framework, and it's great. Competitive landscape and advantages of Drupal are kind of changing a bit, but still, I think, still in place. And you gotta love configuration synchronization in Drupal 8. Use it all the time, but maybe know when to apply those best practices. Sometimes maybe they're not appropriate for a project, and I think working with clients can have internal team doing site building, and that could be a case that we're supporting them on production overrides. So really, we want to be tailoring that workflow more, and so the best practice is really dependent on the scale of the project and what phase it's at and what the needs of the client are. And that's it. So, any questions, comments?
I just want to comment on, so I think it's really great that you're bringing up this whole kind of production level config changes and bringing that back into a project, because I think that has kind of become a dirty word in our industry, and almost every project that I'm on starts with like a developer and changes, then configuration pushes off and goes one way. And to me, I've always struggled with that because the whole power of Drupal has this user interface configuration, right? So like, if we were only writing code and pushing it up one direction, and we're saying, don't touch any of this for a client or anything like that, it's like, in my mind, why are we using Drupal at all? Because it'd be easier to write that code in like an MVC framework or something like that. The whole reason that it has power is it's able to be done in a user interface, put into a database, and then extracted. Like, it just seems crazy to me that if we don't give that power like to people who can't code, then why do we have it in the first place?
Yeah, exactly. It's a good summary. And I think that word direction, right? Like, we've shifted to this like direction, like this mono direction, and Drupal's power, it should really be bi-directional or tri-directional maybe, and why not maybe shift to support that better, right?
So one possible way to do that is to leverage the power of Composer. Whereas you export the configuration to a Git repo and you tag it. You import that via Composer. On the production side, you dump your database, you dump your configuration, you look for changes against the tag, and then you commit those changes, create the tag. So now you've got a merge between what your developers are doing and what your clients are doing on production, and it's all managed through Git. There are definite ways that you can manage that to allow you to do that. It's just a simple workflow problem.
Yeah.
I think there's a mindset problem there too, and I think that's what I think is really disappointing about how Dries and others are characterizing Drupal as an enterprise-only, one-way tool. And what Aaron is describing is a client reality, and it's an agile reality. In the very early stages of a project, you need to be fluid. You need to have people working and prototyping and iterating on things, and that is where our super structured develop, deploy, work on it process is incredibly hindering. So it's always going to be the reality that the client needs this change today, and you've got to be able to work on it there. But I think it's equally, I don't want to understate how important it is for us to be able to work quickly and in an iterative way, when we're first starting out on a project and still figuring out if we have the content model right, if the entry process is okay.
Yeah, and I don't want to mischaracterize Dries or Acquia as like saying that the enterprise way is the right way. It's sort of implicit, so I just wanted to kind of draw out and kind of make it more explicit. Like, hey, there are other workflows happening that we should be more deliberately supporting rather than just assuming. I think, yeah, like the word dirty. It feels a little dirty. And medical marijuana is a thing, right? No, like I think there's a good analogy there. Like, you shouldn't feel dirty if you need it for your glaucoma. It's serving a need. Like, and likewise, the production configuration changes serve the need of rapid time to market. Like, they need, you have somebody going to the site like in an hour. To go through all that deployment workflow could really slow the process down.
But from that standpoint, could we then just do the actual rollout cycle of Drupal, the software itself? When you're in the prototyping stage, we soften this kind of back and forth between production and live. We're a little more forgiving because the developers are more, theoretically, everybody's more communicative in there. Where if something happened in live, there's a chance you can pull it back. And then as you move into your maintenance mode, you treat it like a maintenance mode on a real software product. At that point, you lock it down, you go with the config only, no config happening on the live, and anything that happens there, you heavily eval and run, because theoretically at that point, you're in a stable production environment, and if it goes wrong publicly, and depending on your company, your clients, but that could be brutal.
But I think the key thing is depending on the scenario, right? And you're right, but not you know, it's not necessarily public. I mean, you can make configuration changes that are still, you have to be an authenticated user to access them, right? It's okay.
I'm not meaning public as far as the public making the configuration changes. I mean.
No. I'm not talking about making them. I'm talking about them seeing any of the changes. Like, you can make configuration changes on a production site, and granted, there may possibly be side effects. It takes a level of understanding of like experience to know what those changes can be, right? But when you do lock down the project, I'm again, like, it depends on the scale of the project.
I'm trying to keep the flexibility. It's just, you know, there are certain things I do very well, and even on the things I do very well, in that rush moment, or sometimes that, oh, I know what I'm doing moment, this is just a standard. That's where you can slip. And sometimes that slip, maybe it's inconsequential, maybe it's not. Maybe it's an extra space at the end of a line that you didn't realize you touched because your phone went off when you hit it and it got out. You know, that's just where I look at it is, again, in the prototype stage, absolutely, stuff's moving too far and too fast, and you want to be as iterative as you possibly can and as agile. It's just at some point, while the site is never done, it's okay to say it's good here and kind of branch off with the other stuff that you really want to do for the next phase of it. Of course, conditional on everything else, but just...
Yeah, I think it depends on the expectations of the stakeholders, right? And if their expectations are that it's like you're not exposing that risk that you're talking about, and that that's sort of your relationship, your established relationship, and the kind of built-in, you know, the situation there. But you know, with other client projects, like I've worked with, the client themselves, you know, they are actually the owner of the site. We're working on their behalf, right? And I could install config read-only and tell them, sorry, you know, we have to do a development workflow. The thing that scares me about that is these clients are going to say, you know what, we're sick of Drupal. We're sick of these like 2-week deployments to just make like rename a content type. Like, give me a break. I can do this in Squarespace in 5 minutes, and it takes you 2 weeks. And they're going to leave. Like, they are leaving. So we gotta find the right balance for a project. Oh yeah. Any more question? So I didn't think of a question. But we got a couple T-shirts to give away. So we have to think of a quiz. So who's using config read only on the site? All right, you two get T-shirts. How about that?
Thank you, sir.
Any more? So, all right, I think we're good. Stick around for Zach's session if you want to get more into the kind of nitty gritty of config management, and have a great day.
Thank you.